everyone. Thank you for joining us today in this Arthan interview series. My name is Satyam. I am the founder of Arthan, a social enterprise that provides capacity building support to civil society organizations. This is our attempt at creating a platform that allows for a free flow of ideas and conversations on issues and topics relevant to the social impact sector. Every week, we will speak to thought leaders and experts to learn and get their insights into various topics of relevance to the social impact sector. In this interview today, we are joined by Sudhish Venkatesh.
Chief People Officer at Azim Premji Foundation.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sudhish. I would like to tell everyone what Sudhish has done in his career, in this incredible journey. So Sudhish is at Azim Premji Foundation right now, where he has a mandate to attract great talent and develop people capability. Powered by a 21 billion endowment from Mr. Azim Premji, the foundation aims to make a deep at-scale impact on the quality of elementary education for the underprivileged children in India. Before this, Sudhish was with the shared service. Sudhish was earlier the shared service lead for Tesco People and Payroll Program in the UK. Tesco employs 300,000 people in the UK and Ireland, and his role was to improve the people and payroll services they receive. Prior to this, Sudhish headed human resource for Tesco in India. Sudhish started out his career with the Asian Paints, where he was instrumental in setting up the training function. He also worked on an assignment on organization and strategy with Booz Allen and Hamilton, which is now called Strategy Act. Sudhish is the regional president south of the national HRD network and serves on its national board. He co-edited the NHRD Journal on Education, Employability and Employment, and is often invited to speak on education and people matters. Sudhish holds a degree in Electronics and Communication Engineering and a postgraduate degree in Management from the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata. Thank you so much for joining us, Sudhish. We are really looking forward to an exciting conversation with you today. I would jump in directly and would like to understand, Sudhish, from you. First of all, we read the bio, but before even I jump into my first question, I would like to hear about your journey from you. How did human resource happen? If you want to just talk about that.
Partly by accident, I would think. In hindsight, I think I would say fortunately by accident. After my post-graduation, I joined Asian Paints, and Asian Paints had this, practice of rotating people across functions. So while I started off in sales and distribution, I was subsequently asked to move to human resources, and that's where I spent another 5 years. So 5 years with sales and distribution, 5 years with HR, and subsequently I have sort of stayed with HR primarily. So it was a fortunate accident, I think.
Good to hear that. I think it's especially true for all the young people who are thinking about how do people end up making these choices and looking for technology to answer that in today's day and age. So Sudhish, a lot has happened in 2020. We are still, it would take us a long time for us to digest what happened in 2020. But I wanted to ask you, how do you expect philanthropy to adopt and change as we enter 2021, especially in light of COVID-19 and what we have learned in 2020?
Yeah, see, we all know that COVID has derailed the lives of many people, but more importantly, one should recognize that the more severely impacted are the vulnerable sections of the society. It has hit the vulnerable sections more than the others, right?
Right.
And even after the pandemic subsides, it is believed that the scars of this impact will remain on these disadvantaged groups for a long time. Which means that, this is an opportunity for, philanthropy, both in India and worldwide, to really get their act together. And, you know, for example, health, livelihoods, financial security, children's learning, everything has got impacted for these vulnerable sections, right? It's even said that about close to 6 million children in India may have permanently been out of school now, meaning they have lost, there is no possibility of them even coming back to school. This is the kind of impact that has happened. So therefore, big philanthropy has a big opportunity now to make a big difference. So this is the first comment that I wanted to make. The second, I also think will happen is, all charities will, I think, re-examine their methods, their portfolios, and who they make grants to. I think this is going to happen because there is also the need for agility. Both the CSR as well as the philanthropies need to sort of respond to the emerging situation quickly, which means some recalibration of their portfolios, right? So this is, I think, and the way they do the grant. So this is the second thing that will happen. The third, I believe, is, there is also a kind of a striking awareness now that the public health infrastructure in the country is broken, right? So, it's just an example of how systemic improvements need to be made. It's not enough to just do some isolated acts of philanthropy, but you need to look at the whole issue a little more systemically. And this has come into focus all the more after COVID-19, particularly in public health, right? So I think systemic improvements will become an important focus area. And the last thing with which I will close this part is, these are extraordinary times, and extraordinary times need extraordinary response, right? So therefore, the way things were being done pre-COVID cannot really continue. And therefore, I do think that people will change their methods, activities, and the like. So that's in summary what I think will happen with philanthropy, Satyam.
Thank you so much, Sudesh. And I think that brings me to my second question, which is connected with the way you mentioned that agility is important. You mentioned that, how the vulnerable have been most impacted in light of the COVID. We all have seen how privileged we are even to be in this conversation, sit at home and, work from home. At the same time, though, the world still remains remote. We might not go back to work in the same manner as we did till January or February of 2020 pre-lockdown. I wanted to hear your views on what do you think are some of the key skills and values that will play a critical role in the social impact sector going forward, in light of what we have learned in 2020.
Right. Yeah. See, while I did say in the first part that, things will change, and I elaborated on that. But it's also true that, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Particularly in terms of the key skills and values that you spoke of, which will play a critical role in the social impact space. For instance, the passion for this sector, ownership to make a difference, those won't change, right? Anybody who's looking to recruit will look for, does this person have that drive? Does this person want to take ownership to make the change? So that aspect of skill, value, whatever you might call it, will certainly remain. The second, I also think that capacities are also important, right? Whether it is the domain itself, it could be education, it could be healthcare, it could be ecology, whatever, right? Or the function, it could be project management, it could be finance, it could be people, whatever, or behavioral. Any of these three, domain, function, or behavioral skills, those will continue to be at a premium. So you need to bring this to the table. So, and the third, to my mind, is this, because we will be in a world of ambiguity, the need to learn, relearn, that will continue to remain, right? So constantly being able to grow amidst the ambiguity that we are all going to be confronted with, that's also going to remain. So hopefully that sort of addresses your question.
Right. No, that's a very, I remember a couple of years ago, I was personally working on an entrepreneurship program for the government school children in Bihar. And in entrepreneurial skills, we used to call that tolerance towards ambiguity would rank very highly. And I think in this today's day and age, it's not just a skill for an entrepreneur, probably it's a skill for every person, because we don't know what the future would hold for us. And the more we are, the more we can adapt, the more we can go through those changes, the more flexible we are, the better position we are to deal with the changes that will be thrown at us.
Absolutely.
Great. Sudhish, I mean, though philanthropy has evolved, I mean, you have spent more than a decade now in this sector, though this sector gets criticized the most for fundamentally around capacity, for execution. I mean, I would like to hear from you. What do you think are some of the major gaps we have in the social sector? There are gaps which we fulfill. So which is the gaps, the work that should be done by the government technically is done by the social sector. But otherwise, what are the gaps that we also need to fulfill if we want to achieve the sustainable development goals? We are 10 years away from that. And as you mentioned, millions of children who are not going to be in the school this year, our work is only increasing and not decreasing. So what are some of the gaps or the challenges you see in the social sector, and how do you see that, how we should be addressing those?
Right. I'll pick a few, Satyam. You see, the first is, increasing the canvas itself, right? For whatever reason, I'll just take an illustration to make this point. It's estimated that about 45%, close to 45% of the CSR funds are going to Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Gujarat, which are actually among the more well-developed states of the country, and have amongst them 25% of the population. So if you really see this, the canvas of social sector funding is restricted to a few states. It should be more appropriately distributed, is my first submission. So that's one gap that needs to be filled. Similarly, a big part of CSR funds are going to education and health. There are many other sectors which are underfunded. So both from a geography as well as a sectoral standpoint, it's better that we are more evenly distributed or more appropriately distributed. That's my first submission. The second is, I also think we need to collaborate a lot more and learn from each other. So this whole ecosystem for shared learning, what happens in one organization, what are their learnings, so that, I can straight away take off from that point rather than reinventing the wheel. I don't think we do enough of that, right? So that's an area where if we get our act together, we can do more impactful work. So that's the second gap. The third, which I think has come into more focus in the last few years, is we need to develop a greater tolerance and support for civil society. Many civil society organizations seem to be getting affected, either because their funding lines have dried up, or because, public opinion has turned against them, whatever. There are various reasons which are causing this. But, as a society, we need to sort of develop greater tolerance and support for this, right? So that's the third.
Right, right.
The fourth point is another big gap is stability in funding, right? Many organizations don't have that. And even the few that have that almost always get the money for operations and not much for organization building. You actually need stability of funding and also funding for building the organization, which means proper investments in people, IT, financial procedures, and so on and so forth, right? And lastly, I think this sector will certainly do with a better supply chain of services. Whatever you take, and if I take the people aspect of it, which I'm more familiar with, things that you take for granted in other sectors, a pool of recruitment consultants, recruitment process outsourcers, compensation benchmarking, job portals, any of these are relatively underdeveloped in our sector. So there are several of these gaps which occur to me, Satyam.
Right. No, thank you so much, Sudesh. I think you've touched upon most of the critical gaps, like from increasing the canvas to CSR, getting to regions which are underserved, to looking at how do we get more funding for investing in the organization. I mean, I remember there was a time before COVID, we were advocating for increasing the overheads from 10% to 20%, where a lot of Indian philanthropy would focus on that 10% as a cap. But with this present regulatory environment, we are looking at a lot more cut down on overheads, even in case of foreign contribution. So I think the funder or the government and the funders both needs to collectively work together. Because if we want the civil society organizations to sustain, we clearly need to build the capabilities of the organization, which, as you rightly said, is the people and the processes that matter, because there is no room to invest in the organization. Which brings me to, while I was reading your bio and I was thinking how someone can go from like a Tesco's chain to like a Azim Premji Foundation. So I would love to hear about, how did that transition happen, and what were some of the challenges you would have faced in setting up the foundation early days, from a people function lens, if you want to talk about it, Sudeep. But I'm curious to hear more about your personal journey of transition and how did that happen 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. See, I had done 2 decades of work in the corporate sector, and there was that point of time where I was looking for another opportunity. The more I looked at the corporate sector, it looked more of the same. And fortuitously, at that time, Mr. Premji was making the endowment, the first big endowment. Of course, the foundation had been started before that, but
right.
in 2010, he had firmed up his first $2 billion endowment. And the foundation was looking to sort of strengthen some of these areas, the HR area, the finance area, the IT area, and so on and so forth, so that it could allow the foundation to scale. So I thought this may be an interesting thing to try, and that's how I got talking with the foundation. They found me interesting, and that's how I got here. And education, of course, was always an area where I had great belief in, and therefore there was a match. And the kind of stability that Mr. Premji's funding and the seriousness of purpose that I could see in my conversations with the foundation's leadership, it was fairly clear that, look, this is the right place to put my time in. And that's how I have been associated with the foundation. Of course, it has grown in multiple ways. Our field work has expanded. We now have a university which is also chugging on, and then we also have a grants making arm in the philanthropy team. So much has happened in the last 10 years, and I have been sort of fortunate to be part of that.
Good to hear that. Yes, and specifically, I think the diversity of this all, right? Like even within the social impact space, like to be able to run a foundation, to build a university, to do grant making, clearly different kind of leadership skills are required to do this kind of work. And which brings me to my next question, Sudesh, which is, what do you think are the key leadership skills or the critical leadership skills we need in the post-COVID era to create a more equitable society? And this is linked with what you just started out with in the conversation right at the beginning, that we have gone back in time. We are not better off in 2021 as we enter. We are probably back by a decade or 2 decades. Everyone is talking about that. So what are the key skills we need in our leaders going forward? And I would like you to answer that also for a leadership community beyond social impact, like as we try to create a better world.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. See, let me pick two or three which come to my mind, Satyam. You see, I think uh, the first is resilience, right? These are times when, it's quite easy to give up. And particularly in the social impact space, when results take a long time, setbacks of the kind that we have seen in the last 1 year could be devastating, right? But you just have to stay the course, and um, leaders have to take the teams through this uncertainty. They have to walk the teams through this uncertainty and give them the reassurance that we will together make it happen. So that whole piece of resilience, I think, is important. The second is empathy. See, we started by you talking about how incredibly privileged we are to even be talking from our homes on a medium like this today, when so many children are going to be out of school. See, what has happened, I think also, is that we have become even more unequal as a society and even more divided in our thoughts than what we used to be a few years ago. So leaders will have to play that integrative role in one sense to sort of forge some commonness, and therefore, that's the second aspect. So being empathetic to what's happening around us. Right. And third is, leaders should also use their position to do the greater good. And what I mean by that is, of course, and since you said, look, let's also address people beyond the social sector. A lot of us in corporate roles have been largely goaled around, how well we manage the finance, the customers, the operations, and the people, right? That's been the traditional 4-quadrant structure of performance indicators of people. I think community is to be the fifth big segment there. So leaders need to visualize their role where community has as important a place as finance, customer, operations, and people. So that's what I would say is required of leaders, Satyam.
So very good to hear that. And I think specifically putting community at the heart of everything, because all of us have a role to play in society. And every business has a role to play in a society beyond creating profits for the stakeholder or contributing to the business, the larger role. And I think if everyone will imbibe this philosophy, there won't be any corporate social responsibility because that will go in your entire business DNA, and probably will have a larger contribution to society too, beyond what is, at least as per the law, beyond what is being mandated in India. And also the two skills you touched upon, Sudesh, the empathy and resilience. I think COVID-19 has taught us why we need to be more and more empathetic towards people who, because of the people who I mean, we run the cities because of people around us, and we did not do justice to the same folks when COVID happened. And I think COVID is not the only pandemic that has happened. Probably we'll go through a lot more crises, unfortunately, with the world we are living in right now. And we need to be prepared that we don't do injustice to people because of whom the cities are built. Every house is constructed, every shop is run, and infrastructure. Every story like a city is being driven by people who contribute at the blue and gray collar level and beyond. So that's thank you for that insight. Which now when I was thinking about these skills, and also thinking about the fact that you have built a fairly large foundation and have played a role in like setting up the university and other arms of Azim Premji. What do you think are the key ingredients for building a purposeful team and organizations, Sudesh?
Yeah, yeah. See, um, like I said, I have been fortunate to be part of this growth. And if I reflect on this, one is leadership behavior itself. That determines the DNA and the culture of the organization. People may not do what leaders say, but they will certainly do what leaders do, right?
Right.
So, what is the tone that the leaders set? That becomes very important. So if you have to build a team, then the leader has to play that very responsible role there. Now, the second, which I think this can't be underestimated in its importance, is the whole aspect of succession planning, right? When you build teams, team building doesn't happen by chance or by accident. It actually happens by purposive effort. And one of those things is, the leader developing team members, right? Succession planning is a part of that. But, and how does a leader develop that? Clear, consistent communication, keeping ears to the ground, seeking feedback, investing in people. And I mean by this, the time that leaders invest in people so that they are ready when the opportunities come up. So all this is systematic effort, right? And if I were to just elaborate a bit on the culture of good teams, there will be complementarity. It really won't be all of the same kind, although that's a common failing. You have to be very conscious of the diversity, and there has to be a respect for differences, and reward has to be aligned with contribution in whatever way you define reward, but that reward recognition has to be aligned with contribution. All of this play a role in building winning teams. And of course, winning itself is a glue for good teams.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you so much for touching upon that, and specifically, the critical role of leaders to also not just talk about it, but lead and show the actions and what they believe in bringing everyone together. Something is just coming to my mind. I was actually talking to a friend today, right before this call, who teaches in Azim Premji University, and I was generally chatting about what would placement look like for young people, and we were generally talking about the fact that how challenging it would be for young people to enter the workforce, not just for APU. I think this is universally true for anyone graduating from any college in 2021. So if you have to give few pieces of advice based on your stellar career, what would be those advices in terms of dealing with ambiguity from a career lens, or any piece of advice you would like to give to young people who are graduating in 2021?
Right. Yeah. See, we ourselves have a large batch which needs to get placed. So, you know, I'm acutely conscious of, you know, the challenging times in which placements are happening in 2021, right?
Right.
See, and let me stay focused on the people who are graduating from the social sector, from the development and social work kind of campuses.
Right.
See, some things will not go out of fashion. Organizations will continue to value a few things, and we should remember that. Come what may, you know, whatever be the turbulence around us, some things don't go out of fashion, right? So, for example, you know, what I started with by saying, you know, impact, I'm just converting that here to some kind of an achievement orientation. In whatever we have done, we will do, can we demonstrate a certain orientation towards making a difference, to making an impact, and using the most, making the opportunities available. Not everyone amongst us will get equal opportunity, but within the opportunity that has got presented to us, have we made the most of it?
Right.
I think recruiters look for that, right? I mean, supposing you came from a tribal area of the country, you are the first generation learner, and you were exposed to English for the first time when you came to postgraduate campuses. This could be true of many people, right?
Right.
Now, despite that, if you have been able to get quite far in a university of our kind, this will catch the attention of recruiters. So, have you made the most of the circumstances and the opportunities that you had? That's, right, I think, going to be one, right? The second is going to be, you know, demonstrated hard work, you know, whether it is a project or whether it is simple things like, you know, how have you filled in your application form? Have you got the eye for detail? Have you made the effort to understand the organization and position yourself appropriately? These simple things also have a role in selection. And the last thing is, I think, particularly our sector will look for people who are collaborative by instinct and not necessarily competitive. So does the interview demonstrate that, you know, you have worked with teams, you have engaged in projects where you have contributed, and you are not shy of sharing the credit? So all these aspects which are time tested will actually come to the fore. So a degree of achievement orientation, making the most of the circumstances, hard work, attention to detail, quality, and collaboration. Probably those are the elements.
That's great. I mean, I'm just thinking about how you touched upon collaboration, even in terms of knowledge sharing right at the beginning, and now you are bringing that in from a perspective of someone who's looking for employment opportunities in the social impact sector. It's a personal learning for me, and I think even all of us tend to go towards competition. But I guess if we focus a lot more on collaboration, we'll always find better people. Because first you look for people who are very, very, you know, people who are willing to compete. The second thing, you expect the same people to work in a team, and you say teamwork really matters. So I think we end up contradicting ourselves from the time we look at a CV or a profile to what we expect the people to do in a real work environment. Which brings me to my almost second last question, which is, I mean, you touched upon knowledge sharing for the organizations. Now you have touched upon collaborations for young people looking for collaboration as a skill. What do you think is the role of collective impact and collaboration in creating systemic change?
I think that the role of collaboration and collective impact is is enormous, right? The problems that we are confronted with, somebody said, look, if we were to pick three big challenges of 2020, it's conflict, climate change, and COVID, right? You take any of these, they cannot be solved by one organization, right? So therefore, collaboration and collective impact, I just can't underestimate the role of collaboration and collective impact. Now, if there is coordinated effort between various agencies, then that can obviously do wonders, right? So that's something we should remember. Now, how does one achieve this collaboration? Let's spend a minute or two on that.
Right.
See, what I have found is, if organizations have to collaborate, people have to collaborate, then there has to be respect. It can't be determined by the size. One organization could be well endowed, the other may not. But if you have to collaborate, you have to respect for the strengths that each one brings.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep egos and ideologies aside. Right. These are easier said than done, but nevertheless very important, right? So that's one. The second is, what we have learned through our philanthropy organization is we have an extended network of partners. But our responsibility is to make the grant after assessing the need. Our responsibility, and we don't even have the capacity to run that organization. That is best left to the people who know it, who know how to do it, right? So one has to acknowledge that, look, you have to leave it to the people who know it best. Third is the government, right? Partnering with the government. The government has formidable strengths and formidable invested capacities, right? Whether it is the schooling system or the public healthcare system or whatever, right? Now, we have to learn to work with the government. That's a very important element of social sector organizations. And lastly, we should not worry who gets the credit. So if we do all of this, then collaboration and collective impact is possible.
Right. No, that's very critical. I think the last one is like hitting the nail. We should not worry about who gets the credit. Because I think in a lot of collaboration, it becomes pretty much is like who has the ownership, who is going to talk about this, the success will be linked to which organization. And I think also the fact that you did mention the critical role of the government in playing a role. I think they have an infrastructure, they have the funds. All we need to do is bring in the willingness, along with the evidence from the social impact sector, that a difference can be created. Because if the government puts its will behind it, which we have seen with the new curriculum framework that is coming in now, a lot can happen, and none of these challenges in a country of billion can be addressed overnight. But I think we need to systematically work with each other. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure having you with us in this conversation. I personally learned a lot. I think I'm now personally going to look for a lot more collaboration in profiles rather than competition as a spirit. A lot more from leaders who would think about putting the community beyond meeting all the other business goals, even for people beyond social sector. For funders to think about how they can invest in building capabilities of the organizations they are working in, beyond giving money for the projects and the programs. And for us to focus on skills like empathy, resilience, which would matter a lot more in the post-COVID era. It has been a pleasure hosting you at the Earth and Interview series. I would be very, very happy to share the key outcomes of this with you eventually. But thank you for taking the time out and enlightening us with your experience and with your wisdom. Thank you so much.